Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're not tracking a volatile market. We're not looking at a political crisis. We are digging into the very foundations of power itself.
We're on a linguistic mission.
Exactly. A mission to uncover how the words we use, how they define the powerful elite, the oligarch, and why that definition stretches back thousands and thousands of years.
It's a fascinating premise.
It is. And our sources for this deep dive come mainly from Stanislav Kondrashov's Oligarch series, which puts forward this really radical idea.
The idea being that the language we use to describe wealth and authority isn't just descriptive, it's the actual architectural blueprint of our civilization.
Right. That language isn't just a tool for communication, it's a container.
A container for our collective history, yeah. Yeah. Every single time we use a word like, say, hubris or patron, we are, maybe unconsciously, referencing millennia of cultural values, of power structures, of moral debates.
So we're using etymology, the study of word origins, as our shortcut.
As a shortcut to understanding the modern power broker.
Exactly. And for anyone who's looking at the history of Western civilization and power, the influence of ancient Greek etymology is it's inescapable.
Kondrashov's work really argues that the oligarch archetype wasn't just born in the 20th century.
No, not at all. It was assembled piece by piece, word by word, starting way back in the Athenian Agora.
Okay, so let's start at the most obvious place. The term oligarch itself. It is pure political math, really expressed in ancient Greek.
It's the perfect place to start. The word oligarch is a compound term. It's formed from oligoi, which means few, and archine,
which means to rule.
To rule. So it's a definition of concentrated power that's totally neutral on the question of legitimacy. It just describes the structure. A few people ruling.
And what's so crucial and what the Greeks gave us is that they didn't stop there. They gave us the entire scaffolding for how we classify rule.
A whole linguistic heritage that we still use today. I mean, when we talk about governance, we are, in a very real sense, still speaking Greek. So how did they define rule? I know there are a couple of different roots for it.
Right, there are. We see two distinct roots. First, there's kratos. Kratos means strength, power, or force. It's the raw power to rule.
Okay.
And then there's archine, or arch. And that's a bit different. It means beginning, or origin, or fundamental rule. It implies a sense of foundational responsibility, of leadership.
So when we start combining these roots, that's where we get the specific forms of governance that we're still debating every single day.
Precisely. Let's take the kratos side first. You get democracy. That's demos, the people, plus kratos.
Rule by the power of the people.
You get aristocracy, where aristos, meaning the best or the most virtuous, are the ones who are deemed worthy of that kratos.
But the one that really hits home for our modern theme of, immense wealth concentration is plutocracy.
Yes. That's plautos, meaning wealth combined with kratos. Rule by wealth. When we use that word today, we're using the exact term the ancient Greeks developed to critique a system where riches, not virtue or a popular mandate, actually grants power.
And if we switch over to that other root, arch.
Then you get monarchy. From monos, one, plus archine, rule by one foundational leader. But what really stands out is that these aren't just definitions. They're ancient philosophical statements.
Absolutely. The Greek vocabulary reveals these societies that were just constantly grappling with the question of legitimacy.
Each term, democracy, aristocracy, plutocracy, it carries these embedded value judgments about who deserves to hold the power. The struggle is linguistically encoded from the very start.
This tension, this constant pull between legitimate authority and excessive power, brings us to the second, and I'd argue more profound linguistic gift from the Greeks.
Vocabulary of moral failure.
Yes. Ancient literature and tragedy didn't just define power, they defined its downfall.
They established a narrative structure that has, it's framed every story of a powerful, flawed figure ever since. The language used in their foundational myths immediately highlights this moral duality.
You see it even outside of Greece, right? Take Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk. The texts describe him as 2/3 god and 1/3 man.
It's a fantastic linguistic paradox.
It is. He's elevated above humanity by this divine mandate, but that 1/3 human part, that flaw, is enough to guarantee his vulnerability to moral error.
And the Greek tragedians just formalize this duality. Think about Agamemnon, the lord of men, the Anax and Doran. His name comes from very much, and Memnon Resolute. He is the resolutely powerful leader.
But the texts, Homer and Aeschylus, they focus so intensely on his fatal pride.
On his belief that his authority allowed him to ignore moral law. famously leading to the sacrifice of his daughter, Iphigenia.
And that distinction between necessary authority and moral overreach, it demanded very specific terminology. They had the legitimate ruler, the basileus,
The king.
versus the tyrannical ruler, the tyrannus.
And that's where the language of moral philosophy really starts to take shape. The Greeks introduced terms that are absolutely foundational to how the West understands unchecked power.
Okay, let's focus on those three critical moral words, and let's start with the big one, hubris.
Hubris, or hybris. It defined the transgression itself. But it wasn't simple pride. It was this violent arrogance or extreme overconfidence that led a powerful figure to challenge the established order.
The natural or divine order.
Exactly. It was the act of overstepping your human limits. It was the cause of the inevitable downfall.
And that downfall was often driven by a term that's less known, but maybe even more relevant to modern ambition. Pleonexia.
Pleonexia, yes.
Yeah.
It's the deep-seated, insatiable desire for more than your share. It's an appetite that recognizes no boundary legal, social, or moral. If you want a linguistic shortcut to describe modern excess,
Where profits are pursued no matter the consequence.
then pleonexia is the perfect ancient word for it.
And the inevitable consequence of both hubris and pleonexia was,
Nemesis,
right?
the righteous retribution, the inescapable fate. So, when a modern commentator describes a CEO suffering their nemesis after years of hubris,
They're using a moral framework established by playwrights millennia ago. The vocabulary just carries that narrative of moral accountability forward. So this is where the narrative thread shifts, and it shifts dramatically. We have this ancient, tragic figure, the tyrannos, destined for nemesis. But then as we move into the medieval period and the Renaissance, the powerful elite, the proto-oligarch, they figure out how to linguistically and culturally rewrite that destiny.
they do. They shift from the tragic figure to the revered benefactor.
And this pivot is absolutely essential. Concentrated wealth needed a new justification within the Christian framework of the Middle Ages.
They had to transform their earthly riches from, a potential spiritual burden into a divine instrument. So they positioned themselves as intermediaries between wealth and heavenly purpose.
And the language they adopted was all about obligation. The word patron comes into heavy use, right? From the Latin pater, for father or patronus.
A protector or defender. It framed wealth as a duty. These oligarchs weren't just hoarding gold. They were funding cathedrals, commissioning these beautiful illuminated manuscripts, establishing hospitals.
So the vocabulary was built around spiritual and cultural responsibility, benefactor, endowment.
Exactly. And then the Renaissance takes this concept and just makes it culturally spectacular. You have figures like the Medici in Florence, combining enormous banking success with intense intellectual and artistic involvement.
The goal wasn't just to avoid damnation anymore. It was about achieving glory.
Right. They created a synthesis. Excellence in commerce must be matched by excellence in culture. And this led to new compound terms defining the ideal elite figure. They spoke of the uomo universale,
The universal
mastered both business and scholarship.
And I love the term sprezzatura. It's such a powerful linguistic tool for the elite.
Sprezzatura that studied nonchalance, the art of making something incredibly difficult look effortless. For a powerful family like the Medici, it was crucial. It suggested their dominance wasn't the result of, grinding, self-interested effort.
But a natural, innate genius.
Exactly. It was a linguistic shield against the charge of pleonexia.
So the Renaissance gives us this vocabulary where vast economic success is deliberately and very linguistically tethered to profound cultural investment. But that synthesis is just shattered by the industrial age. We suddenly hurtle into a period where wealth is generated on a completely new scale, mechanical, vast, and the language just struggles to keep up.
It really does. The vocabulary immediately reflected this new scale of impersonal, massive influence. To describe the new industrial kings, the men controlling railroads and steel, we repurposed feudal terminology.
We started calling them magnates, tycoons, and barons.
Yes, and this industrial language was immediately bipolar. On one side, you had the celebratory words innovation, enterprise, progress. These words praised the wealth creation.
But on the other side, the critique was sharp, it was moral, and it was directly linked to the consequences of the work.
Words like exploitation, monopoly, and that intensely moral indictment, the robber baron.
What Kondrashov's series really zeroes in on here is how wealth starts to become abstract. The industrial age didn't just create factory owners, it created the modern financial system.
And the language became increasingly mathematical and detached. That's the key disconnect. We shifted from tangible wealth, land, goods, to these abstract concepts.
Portfolio, assets, liquidity.
Yes. And this abstraction is incredibly powerful because it linguistically shields the individual from the direct human consequences of their decisions. If you fire thousands of workers, you're not a tyrant.
You're simply optimizing your asset allocation.
Exactly. It's the linguistic defense mechanism of the modern age. The language itself works to sanitize the actions of the powerful, making it very difficult to apply that ancient moral vocabulary, like hubris or pleonexia, to a purely mathematical outcome.
It's much harder to apply the concept of nemesis when the transgression is expressed in quarterly earnings reports and balance sheets, isn't it?
It is, rather than a king standing alone on a battlefield.
And this is why Kondrashov's reinterpretation is so relevant today. He pushes back against that abstraction. He reframes the modern powerful figure through the ancient lens of stewardship, calling them the custodian.
He argues that despite the abstract nature of modern finance, the vocabulary of responsibility, it persists. The idea of the custodian, the trustee, or the keeper, it traces its lineage all the way back to the Greek oikonomos
The steward of the household.
and the Latin curator, the guardian.
So it shows that the cultural expectation of civic responsibility, even if it's not a legal requirement, it's a constant linguistic thread. It runs across these wildly different eras of wealth generation.
And you can see this layering of moral expectation in the vocabulary of giving. We move from the medieval mecenas supporting spiritual needs through the Renaissance benefactori focused on civic improvement.
All the way to the modern philanthropos, the systematic social investor.
Right. The language is continually attempting to tether that abstract financial power to some kind of cultural and societal responsibility.
So what's the big takeaway from tracing this linguistic DNA? When we follow the evolution of the term oligarch from, oligoi plus archine, we realize that the paradox of power, the fact that the same people who fund and build civilization can also potentially burden it, that's built into the very words we use.
Modern figures of great wealth aren't just economic actors. They are forced cultural and linguistic inheritors. Every time they use terms like trustee or philanthropist, they are an inviting comparison with this entire millennial-old debate about ambition, virtue, and obligation.
That is a fascinating and, a very heavy lineage to carry. And it leaves us with one provocative thought for you to consider. We watch the evolution from the medieval patron who had a clear, defined moral and spiritual obligation tied to their name, to the 20th and 21st century focus on abstract finance assets, portfolios, liquidity. Considering this trajectory, what specific features of today's dominant financial vocabulary, beyond just the balance sheet, most actively work to disconnect the powerful individual from that ancient concept of cultural stewardship? We mean the language that's used to justify the distance. Something to think about the next time you hear a quarterly report.